So I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers who originally invited me to give this presentation way back in 2020 at the meeting that was planned to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Gemini Observatory. Of course, the universe had other plans, but I'm delighted to be here today, this week, in person, and it's nice to be out, at least some of us getting to in-person conferences again. So the survey was a huge, GCLASS was a huge team effort, but I'd like in particular to acknowledge the contributions of Adam Muzzin, who is now a faculty member at York University. And the silver lining of the 2-year delay is that I'll also be able to tell you some hot off the press results from GCLASS's daughter survey, Go Green, today. So we've known for a long time that at redshift 0, cluster galaxies are much more likely to be quenched than field galaxies. So the green squares you see there are observations, cluster galaxies, the quenched fraction, and the orange triangles are the quenched fraction in the field. However, it is very difficult for models of all kinds. They struggle. I'm showing one of the models by a green line. Models struggle to match the quenched fraction of cluster galaxies, of satellite galaxies. As you can see by it's indicated there by the black arrow. We'll skip that on the screen anyway. Indicated there by the black arrow. The models overproduce the number of quenched galaxies, and this is particularly a problem at lower stellar mass. So one of the things we can try to do is go to higher redshift, try to measure quenching over a longer period of time to get some insight into what might be going on. There's clearly something lacking in our fundamental understanding of the physics of how galaxies quench in dense environments like clusters. And that's where GCLASS comes in. GCLASS was a spectroscopic survey of 10 rich clusters at about redshift 1 with the GMOS instruments. And what's really fantastic about Gemini is that there are 2 telescopes, one in the north, one in the south. But also the GMOS instrument on both of those telescopes is pretty much a clone. And so we're able to make quite homogeneous measurements, both in the north and in the southern hemispheres. Here is the sample of 10 clusters that were selected from the Spitzer-Sparks infrared survey. And GMOS allowed us to get very high spectroscopic completeness. We got in total about 500 members across those 10 clusters. And for its time when we started this survey, I mean, people at redshift 1, they were studying single clusters at a time. So to be able to get observations of so many galaxies in 10 clusters was really quite a step forward, and allowed us to study some more subtle effects that you just can't do with a single cluster. Now, GMOS offers nod and shuffle, which is a rather clever way of doing sky subtraction. And this means you can make observations with much shorter slits than you can with a regular multi-object spectrograph. And that means you can pack in many more high-priority targets, potential cluster members, onto one mask than you can with other multi-object spectrographs. I'm showing you there an example on the right from GMOS. These are real masks. There are 52 slits on that mask, and in the middle, a real mask from Keck Elwes. And so you can see that with GMOS, you can get an efficiency of more than 4 times what you can with a regular spectrograph. And that makes GMOS a really efficient redshift machine. So GCLASS was quite a large project. It was about 222 hours. And we had 8 allocations of time. And we did this before Gemini offered large and long programs. So we're actually very fortunate that GCLASS was supported consistently by the US and the Canadian tax. And we're very appreciative for that, that they supported us all through those years. As I said, it's a survey of 10 clusters, and they range in redshift from about 0.86 to about 1.34, about 50 members per cluster. And in addition to the GMOS spectroscopy, we also went and got a lot of multi-passband photometry. We have 12 passbands to pretty homogeneous depth for each of those 10 clusters. When we were designing Go Green, which I'll talk about in a minute, the highest 5 redshift clusters became part of the Go Green. And so we were able to go back and get even deeper observations later of those highest redshift 5. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that even at redshift 1, the environment strongly alters the quenched fraction of galaxies. What you're seeing here is a cluster stellar mass function on the left and the field stellar mass function on the right. Black is all galaxies, red is quenched galaxies, and blue is star-forming galaxies. And you can see that there's a significant population of quenched galaxies in those redshift 1 clusters. Now, at the time we started this survey, there were quite a few papers that had been published claiming a reversal of the star formation rate density in clusters. In other words, those papers were claiming that there was a higher fraction of star-forming galaxies in clusters relative to the field. And with this wonderful Gemini spectroscopy, we were able to show that that was just not the case, at least not for this sample of clusters. We were also able to measure the amount of star formation that's going on in the clusters. And we were able to measure that about 45% of the star-forming galaxies, which would normally be forming stars in the field, have actually been quenched by the cluster environment at this redshift. I'll come back to what we think is doing the quenching at the end of my talk. So while we measured a high quenched fraction of galaxies in these clusters, we found that the galaxy scaling relations don't actually depend very much on environment at redshift 1, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So what you're seeing here is specific star formation rate plotted as a function of radius, with distance from the cluster center increasing to the right all the way out to the field there on the extreme right. And the different colored lines, each of those colors is for different stellar mass. So you can see that the specific star formation rate does indeed depend on stellar mass. The lines are of different values, but they're pretty much flat. They're pretty much independent of environment. So specific star formation rate is a function of stellar mass, but lower stellar mass galaxies have higher specific star formation rates. But it really doesn't appear to depend very much on environment at all. Another thing that people commonly plot is D4000, the 4,000 angstrom break. Here you see it plotted on the top for quiescent galaxies and below for star-forming galaxies, and again, as a function of stellar mass. Again, we see that the 4,000 angstrom break, it does depend on stellar mass. It's a stronger break for higher stellar mass galaxies. Those galaxies are older, but the lines are pretty flat. There's very little dependence on environment. So here I plotted the mass size relation, clusters on the left, the field on the right. Again, red is quiescent, blue is star forming, and the black lines are best fit scaling relations from 3D HST in the field. And we've taken the same lines and just overlaid them on the cluster galaxies. And you can see that actually they're pretty well fit by the field scaling relations. Now, there's a little bit of difference. We actually found that cluster galaxies are about 20% smaller than field galaxies at the same redshift. But it's not a big difference. The mass size relation is almost identical between the cluster and the field. So again, not a big environmental effect. Another key finding is that we found post-starburst galaxies to be very common in clusters at redshift 1, and they likely represent a key rapidly quenching transition population. And I'll show you what I mean. Here you see the fraction of post-starburst galaxies, again, as a function of cluster center distance, and with the lines, each different color representing a different stellar mass. Out in the field, there's only a few percent of post-starburst galaxies, a small fraction. But in clusters, there can be 10% of more post-starburst galaxies. And certainly as you go to lower stellar mass, there seem to be more post-starburst galaxies. When we plotted the post-starburst galaxies, they're here in green, on the size-mass relation, we almost couldn't believe our eyes. They fell almost perfectly in this intermediate location between where the quiescent and the star-forming galaxies lie. And not only were they intermediate in size, they were also intermediate in their morphology properties. If you look in the inset there, that's showing Sir6 parameter. And the green point is the mean value for starburst galaxies, and it falls again intermediate between the value for star-forming galaxies and the value for quiescent galaxies. So it seems, based on this evidence, that the post-starbursts are just gradually fading. They're quenching from the outside in, and their disks are fading. I don't have time to go through all of the findings today, but I have summarized the papers. We've got, including the 3 survey description papers, we've got a total of 20 publications so far from GCLASS, and I've summarized them there so you can, by topic, so you can go and take a look if you're more interested in learning more of the details. So I'd like to spend the last few minutes of my talk describing Go Green. Go Green, as I said already, is the daughter survey of GCLASS. And this is a 530-hour large and long program, which took observations between 2014 and 2019, a total of 10 semesters. Because of the deployment of the red-sensitive Hamamatsu detectors, we were able to push out a little bit in redshift to 1.5. And this was a spectroscopic survey of 26 clusters and groups between redshift 1 and 1.5. And again, going back and targeting those 5 highest redshift G-class clusters, but being able to observe their members to lower stellar mass. Again, a large team involved. You can see the names there. Many graduate students and postdocs have contributed to the success of Go Green. So I have plotted the 26 systems there in green, and the tracks are the predicted evolution from redshift 1 to redshift 0. And you can see that what we've got is quite a large range in halo mass. We've got things that are going to evolve into groups at low redshift. We've got some systems that are going to evolve into Virgo mass clusters. We've got some that are going to evolve into coma mass clusters, and then we've got some that will be expected to evolve into clusters of higher mass than coma by redshift 0. So we had a fairly large range in redshift of systems. We had a fairly large range in halo mass. And we also tried to get as large a range of stellar mass as possible, because remember at the beginning I said the quenching effects become particularly noticeable as you push down in stellar mass. The figure on the right shows all the spectroscopically confirmed galaxies that we have. The red ones are quiescent galaxies, and we've managed to push down, we're spectroscopically complete to about a stellar mass of 10 to the 10 at this redshift. We also went and got a lot of multi-passband imaging. We have, again, pretty homogeneous multi-passband imaging for the sample for most clusters in about 14 bands. So this is the fundamental result. This one slide summarizes the largest surprise that we got from Go Green so far. And we found, I'll give you cut to the punchline, that environmental quenching, satellite quenching at redshift 1 is mass dependent, and that's fundamentally different than at low redshift. I'll explain again what I mean by that. So when folks are trying to quantify the difference between quenched fractions in two different environments, they often use this measure called the quenched fraction excess. And as it sounds like, it just means the excess amount of quenching in one environment relative to another. In this case, the excess amount of quenching that occurs in clusters relative to the field. The black points are the Go Green points, and the purple line is the measurement made at redshift 0 from Sloan. And it's really a tale of two stellar masses. On the left, you see the measurement for stellar masses less than 10 to the 10.5. The quench fraction we measure at redshift 1 is almost identical to the quench fraction we measure at redshift 0. The relationship is pretty much flat. There's no dependence of the quenching on stellar mass. However, above stellar mass of 10 to the 5, it's a very different story. There's a tilt to the relationship. It's no longer flat, there's a tilt, and that's very different from at redshift 0. At redshift 0, the purple line is still flat. But here we measure a dramatic tilt to that relation. What we're measuring is a dependence of the quenching that is mass dependent. It's dependent on the stellar mass. And again, as I'm showing there, at high stellar mass, that relationship is fundamentally different than is measured at low redshift. And that's the primary result we have so far from Go Green. Now, I'd like to know what's doing the quenching, wouldn't you? This is a piece of work led by Devontae Baxter. He's a graduate student at UC Irvine. And what he did in this paper is he modeled the quenching timescales of the cluster galaxies. So you have quenched fraction on the y-axis, stellar mass along the x-axis of the left panel, and cluster-centric distance along the right, along the x-axis of the right panel. And we found that you could not match the Go Green observations. The Go Green observations here are in green. You couldn't match the Go Green observations with any quenching timescale model that assumed a constant quenching timescale as a function of stellar mass. So we've got timescales assumed from 0 to 3 gigayears. Those are where the colored points are. And the data just doesn't fit any of those models. However, when you assume the model, or when you adopted a model assuming a mass-dependent quenching timescale, he found that that matched the observations quite well. So the model that he's assuming, the best fit model, is those black points you see, and they match the green observations much better than any of the colored lines. So here we have quenching timescale plotted against stellar mass. And the black line is the quenching model that I just showed you in the last slide. And then we make a little correction for pre-processing. We have to make a little correction. So the first thing to note is it's not a flat relationship. As I just said, the quenching time scale is a function of stellar mass, with high stellar mass galaxies having shorter quenching time scales and low stellar mass galaxies quenching more slowly. We make a little correction because of pre-processing, just to allow for the fact that some of those galaxies that ended up in the clusters fell into groups first. So we have to make an adjustment for the fact that those galaxies get quenched in groups before they fell into clusters. And the process that fits best is this gray line. That gray line is a coal gas depletion timescale prediction. And so what it's saying is the best fit to the observations, the red line, is starvation. This analysis is pointing to starvation of the dominant mechanism causing satellite quenching. So galaxy falls into a halo, it gets cut off from cosmological accretion, it keeps forming stars, it just burns through the fuel it brought with it, and when it's burned through that fuel, it starves and it quenches. That's the conclusion of this paper. Again, I've run out of time, but I've summarized that we've got, I think it's 12 papers now from Go Green. We're still working on the data, we're still analyzing it, but I've summarized them there by topic if you're interested in reading more. And this is my last slide. We have public released all of our observations, fully reduced images, the fully reduced spectroscopy, and a number of advanced data analysis catalogs with things like stellar masses and colors and emission lines and all that good stuff. That's all available from the link you see there, and all of the details are in the 2021 Barlow et al. Paper. And thank you very much. Stop there.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. We have some time for questions.
So you show the cluster galaxies are 20% smaller than the field galaxies. Can you quote the significance of that? And if that's significant, can you attribute to that kind of tighter truncation due to the cluster potential?
So it's a good question, what causes it? It could well be. It could well be. It's possible it's a combination of effects. There's a later paper, and I forgot to say that work was led by Jaslyn Mathrew, who's now a postdoc at Texas A&M. There's a later work that suggests it may be due to ram pressure stripping. Indeed, she has a 2021 paper that I didn't have time to discuss today, but thank you for the question.
Have you had a chance to measure the significance? The 20% is significant, or is it within the statistical error?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
So is that 20% reduction in size, is that significant? How many sigmas?
I can't remember. I mean, not greatly. It's significant, but not a huge result. I can't remember offhand how many sigma. So it was a couple of years since that paper came out.
Hi, great talk and great data. So I was wondering if you could put up the time scale of the satellite quenching as a function of, yes. So I'm probably missing something here. I'm imagining that if starvation is the cause of quenching, then the specific star formation rate for the low mass galaxies is higher. Wouldn't they burn faster through their gas and quench faster? Or is that maybe it's the pre-processing on?
So the low mass galaxies are on the left here. So their quenching time scale is longer than the high mass galaxies.
I'm naively, I would think that they would, if they have higher specific star formation rates, then they would burn through their remaining gas.
That's assuming they all bring the same amount of gas with them.
So they have lower gas fractions as well.
So there's an assumption here about how much gas a galaxy of a particular stellar mass brings with it when it falls into the halo.
See.
I think that's the missing link.
And they're, okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah, a bigger potential well can bring more gas, right?
I see.
We have a question on Slack. Joel Rödiger is asking, what role do the Go Green results leave for REM pressure stripping in quenching cluster galaxies? Can those results put an upper limit on the fraction of galaxies quenched by that mechanism?
So first of all, RAM pressure stripping is likely to become increasingly important as a quenching mechanism as we move to lower stellar mass. As the clusters, build up their the density of the gas in their potential wells as they go larger halos and the potential wells become deeper. RAM pressure stripping at low redshift is likely to be an increasingly important effect in the quenching. So there's room. All I'm saying is this is the dominant mechanism that this analysis is finding at redshift 1.
Well, thank you very much for that. Let's thank Jillian again.